We've got three people now sharing exciting things with us about what God's done in their lives. Paula, shall I just hand over to you and let's welcome Paula because she's feeling a bit nervous.
Thank you. Okay, so we need glasses. Okay, yeah, so for those who don't know me, my name's Paula. And when I was asked to say a few words, the phrase that came into my head was about that God has continually rescued me. Not just an original rescue, but before I knew him and all through the time that I've walked with him. So I was kind of a child of the 70s. I was quite rebellious in my teens. I was interested in music and new ideas and travel and all that kind of thing. And I was a bit stupid. I didn't really have any caution at all, which made me quite vulnerable. And when I think of the things that could have happened to me, I know that God had his hand even then. I mean, I had a boyfriend in Italy. I was traveling in Italy, and some years later, he turned up at my flat in London, and he'd become a heroin addict. And at that point in Italy, it was illegal, so he'd come to me to get help. And eventually, he did manage to kick the habit, but not before he'd become HIV positive. And it changed his whole life. I mean, there's drugs now that can suppress that. There wasn't then. And I look at his life and my life, and I know that could have so easily been me. The first person who ever spoke to me about Jesus, I was in a nightclub in Tenerife. I think God knew that he wouldn't find me in a church. So, and I met a chap, and we got friendly, and I went back to his apartment. And there was quite a lot of art on the walls, and there was one picture in particular that I didn't understand. And it was a picture of 10 young girls holding lamps. And I asked him what it meant. And he told me the story. He said it was from the Bible, and it was about 5 wise virgins and 5 foolish virgins, and they were waiting for the bridegroom. They didn't know when he was coming. They'd all got their lamps, but the wise ones had got oil because it might be night when the bridegroom arrived. And so apparently the bridegroom came at night, and the wise virgins went in. They went into the wedding feast. The doors were closed. And the foolish ones who hadn't given a thought to the future had to run around and go to the shops, try and buy oil. And by the time they'd sorted themselves out, the doors were closed. I think that story means lots of things at different levels. But to me, God said to me that day, you're foolish. You're being really foolish the way you're living your life, and you're not caring about tomorrow. And I went back to my hotel room. It actually wrecked my holiday because I got horribly convicted. I'd always been able to justify the things I did. I'd been married. I left my husband really casually because I found marriage boring. Oh no, and I'm sorry. And all the things that I justified in my own head, through that night, it was like an assault. They were battering down on me. And I suddenly saw myself as being really grubby and selfish and just wrong. It was so uncomfortable. And anyway, went back to the UK, started checking out religion. I knew it wasn't Christianity. I'd sat in church as a kid, and I knew they didn't have any answers to the big questions. What am I doing here? How did it happen? Why? All those things. What's my ultimate destiny? So I looked into lots of other religions, science. But science to me, yeah, there's lots of mechanisms in science, but it doesn't talk about love. I mean, I have a daughter now. I would give body parts for my daughter. I would die for her. But the selfish gene, well, you know, that's the survival of the fittest. That doesn't factor in love. So there wasn't really any answers there. So eventually I thought, well, maybe I'll go to Israel because that's where it all started. So I left my flat in London and I went to Israel for 2 years, looking for answers to the big questions. I did have quite a lot of knowledge by then about Jesus. There was a lot of prophecies in the Old Testament. There's hundreds of them, and some of them really very specific. And the odds of those coming about in the life of one person, it's off the scale, and they actually do all come true in Jesus. So I knew a bit about Jesus. However, 2 years on, I was no further finding peace or any kind of way to live my life. So I went back to the UK. A friend of mine from Israel came over and she wanted to talk about Christianity. And I was like, no, I've done that. I'm finished with that. And she said, no, there are some Christians in London, because I actually didn't think there were. There are a few Christians in London, and I've got an address. And it was a place just down the road from me. And I went along there and I met this elderly couple who'd been missionaries in India. And I just liked being with them. Their house, I felt wholesome and clean, and the white noise in my head just seemed to calm when I was, and I know now that was the Holy Spirit in that house. I didn't understand it then, but I kind of wanted to rub up against them so that what they'd got would rub off on me. And she talked to me and she made me realize I'd been like a really bad guest at a dinner party. I've come in, I've not acknowledged the host, I've disrespected the place, I've treated it like it was my own and I've trashed it. And actually, God created the world and it's his world and he is the host. Anyway, she also talks about what being born again meant. And to me, that was like a bit of a sniggery sort of term, born againers. But she explained that God's reaction to when we do feel grubby and dirty is because we are. If I say to you, Jimmy Savile, most of us have some kind of recoil reaction to that. This was someone who lived very selfishly, who abused others, and he was really the center of his own universe. And I came to realize that was me. I was the center of my own universe, and it was horrible. I didn't understand how to make that transition from being in the dark place to being in the light place where Bill and Dorothy were. They were so joyful. They laughed a lot. They had this lightness about them. And but as a mother, I would die for my child. And she said to me, God, you're God's child, and he died for you. And that's why Jesus came, to clean you, to be able to take you from death to life, from darkness to light. And that just changed my life. I mean, it completely changed my life. It's still going on. I mean, he's still rescuing me. Richard and I have been married 10 years. We're having a marriage course with Mike and Ruth, and we're learning all sorts of things. There's still my way and God's way, and I've still got so much to learn. But, I was thinking if you wanted an electrician or a mechanic or something, you'd go on a recommendation. And if you don't know the Lord, there's a lot of people here would highly recommend God. And it's not just a lifetime guarantee. It's into eternity and beyond. So, it doesn't get better than that.
Very good. That was fantastic, wasn't it? I've lost Omal now. Where are you, Omal? You can welcome Omal as well.
Great. Well, my name is Omal, as Martin has said, and I'm part of LCC. Yeah, many of you have heard my testimony of how I became a Christian. So when Ben did ask again, can you share your testimony? I was like, asking God, what else do you want me to say? So I just prayed and asked God that, look, it's my testimony, so I'm going to say it, and you use it as you want to speak to us. What I wanted him to do is to bless us, to speak to us, whilst I just say what happened to me. So my prayer this morning is that God speaks to us, even though you might have heard it over and over again. But God should speak to us this morning. So I was born into a family of 6. I've got a brother and 2 sisters. I was born as a Muslim because that's what my parents are. Just to give you a bit of a background of where I was coming from, my grandfather, who I was named after, was actually a kind of like, he is an evangelist who brought Islam from the northern part of Ghana. He migrated from Ivory Coast to the northern part of Ghana, and through his work, brought him to the southern part of Ghana. And he established a training school where he trained Islamic scholars. So that's the family I was coming from. So it was really very intense, serious one. And it's through our family where people become sort of imams. So, I mean, if imam would come out from that town we live in, it has to come from our family. So practically, I knew no other religion than Islam. But once I was a Muslim, a bit serious with what I was doing, because my thing is that anything that I do, if there is a reward in what I'm doing, then I want to get it. And how do I get it? Is to do it right and do it well. So I was kind of serious with it. So throughout my cousins, we were a very big family, and all of us were living in the same house, sort of. My uncles, about 5 of them, everyone and his family, and my dad has 2 wives, my uncles have 3 and 2, and so imagine, really huge house all of us were living in. And because I was kind of serious with my prayer and everything, within or among the cousins, I was the family entrusted to do certain things when they are not there. Like, because in Islam, you can't just sort of eat any meat or chicken or whatever. It has to be slaughtered in a right way. So they looked at us and think, okay, he is more sort of, he does everything. So I'm kind of like, so I was entrusted that if they are not there, I can do those things. So that's how the whole thing was. And then I started looking. I kind of like, I want to go to heaven because that's what Islam says, that you would go to heaven. So I don't know why, but I mean, I wanted to go to heaven if I die. So that's my thing. So I started looking because I didn't want to miss it. I don't know why I started thinking that Islam, why do I have to look on the other side as well? But that's what happened. So I started reading the Bible and the Quran at the same time. So this went on for years. And strangely, all my friends, my good friends, were Christians. At the university, I was sharing a room with 2 very good Christians. And people used to ask us, how do you 3 guys manage to live in the same room? Because they were really serious Christians, and I was very, very serious Muslim. And people can't understand how we managed to live in the same room. They would go out there for preaching and other things, and I would go out there talking to people about Islam. I was part of the leadership of Islam on campus at the university, so kind of like everybody knows me on campus to be part of the leadership there. This went on for, I was at the 2nd year at the university, 1 more year to go. A time came when nothing seems to interest me. I was kind of boring to friends, to families. Nobody seems to understand what's going on. And in fact, I myself couldn't understand why my life certainly has changed and nothing seems to interest me. So it was on vacation. We came home, and on the Sunday, I was getting ready to go and play football. So I turned my radio on, and I heard a guy preaching. And it felt like he was talking to me direct. So he was like, you've been trying very hard all the time to do this, and today is the day you can do this. So come on, you can do it. I felt like he was speaking to me. I didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, I realized that I was on my knees, and I prayed a sinner's prayer and gave myself to Christ. The thing is, because God was preparing me towards this, because whilst I was reading, and sometimes I attend churches, sit at the back at the invitation, just to know more about it, because I wanted to go to heaven. I didn't want to die and not go to heaven. So I was making sure that I got the right one. Yes, because if I restrict myself from a whole lot of things, wanting to go to heaven, at the end of the day, I go there and he said, no, you can't, then I wouldn't be happy at all. So I really wanted to find the right one. So I knew what to say if you are convicted of your sin. So there was nobody in my room. It was just myself. And I kneeled down and I prayed and I gave myself to Jesus at the invitation of the guy who I have no clue who he was. Something happened right away, like some load has been lifted off my shoulders. So I just went out and went to my stepmother's room because I lost my mother when I was like 15, so I'd live with my stepmother, and we were very close. Thank God that he gave us somebody who took us as her own. So I went to her room, and she's kind of like, what has come over you? Because she has complained to her friends that I'm not close again and stuff like because of what I was going through. So she was surprised to see me bubbling again into her room, and I couldn't say anything. So he said, what is it? And I can't say anything because I was afraid of what's going to happen to me. She's going to tell my dad. And I knew that wouldn't be. So I don't know then I stopped. I decided not to go and play football again. And I put on my shirt and I just went to town, started looking for all my friends. And I couldn't contain it than to tell them what has happened to me and invite them to become Christians. And they were asking me, when did you become a Christian? How do you tell us as a Muslim to become a Christian? And I started just talking to them about Christ on that same day. I came back home. Time happened. We went back to the uni, and I started from there. And on campus, everybody was the news started spreading that, hey, they said Omar has become a Christian. And people were like, how did that happen? Some were like, there was some girl who was a Christian, and she's the one that I want. So she gave me sort of a condition that if you want me, then you have to become a Christian. But in fact, that wasn't the deal at all. But everybody was speculating that what has happened? Why? I was a bit people know me because of sports. I played football a lot and was into sports. So it was just thing of the moment. Everybody's and people would just come and talk to me. What's happened and stuff like that. So this went on for some time. And I don't know what happened. Somebody, I think it was one of my friends, Muslims on campus, who went home and told my dad of what has happened. So remember one day I wasn't fellowshipping on campus. So I go to town. There was an Assemblies of God church there who I fellowship with them. I was in there, and then somebody said, somebody's looking for you outside. And I said, me? Because I thought there was nobody around who. I went out. They said, my dad is in the car there asking me to come. I didn't know what to do. I don't think I went back to even pick my Bible. So I went straight into the car. And he said I should get in. I got in. Drove me to some old boys in the city where I was at uni. He knew that were Muslim sort of scholars. So they did ask me, this is what your dad is telling us, that you have become a Christian. And my dad wanted to know from me if that is true. It was difficult. I didn't know what to say. So I remember very well, God was asking me, are you going to forsake me and go with your dad? It was difficult because my dad has, when my mom died, it has been him who looked over us. He's got nobody to support him. So it was tough for me. But God kept asking me, are you going to go with your dad or are you going to go with me? I look at myself, what would I do? Because I don't have mother who, if my dad decided not to support me, who would help me. I'm sorry. But Um, I don't know, but I just told them that, yes, it's true that I have become a Christian. I could see my dad crying. But my dad is somebody who will not cry for anything. So it was really tough for him because all he had is kind of like me. I'm his elder son. And to Muslims, if you are the elder son, you are their everything. Everything they've got, they build their life, the whole family around you. So it was really tough for him. But that's what God was impressing on me to say. So I did that. That went on. I mean, actually, he needed to stop and go home. So he dropped me back at campus and then went back home. This went on. I have nowhere to go, isn't it? I had to go home at vacation. I went back home and thank you. Sorry. I went back home. My dad called me again. The man was trying his best. And God helped me to understood from his point of view. So I don't know how God did it. He gave me a big patience and everything to sort of contain everything that was coming from him. Mine wasn't violent, but it was emotional and it was really difficult. In the end, when my dad tried all that he could to get me to become back to Muslim, eventually what he needs to do is to send somebody to go to my mother's dad, he was alive then, to tell him that if he's looking for me, he shouldn't come and ask him because I am no more part of his family. So he asked me to leave. Yeah. God being so good, that time I had finished, so I had to go and do national service. So it wasn't time, but I had to leave home. So I left. I went to where I was doing this national service with no money, nothing on me. But I don't know how God did it. I survived. He has been faithful. He was faithful, and he continues to be faithful. So that's what happened. But I wouldn't stop coming home because God said to me that, yes, they might have forsaken you, but for you, no. So continue to go. So I would wait like some 3 months or so, and then I would come home. And I would be told, no, you are not welcome here. Whenever I come home and I take even a plate and I eat from the plate, they don't eat from it again. It was very difficult. Simply because probably if my mom was around, I don't know, she might not agree with me, but maybe it wasn't my dad's fault as well. Because the whole of that family, there was none of that family is a Christian. So they saw it as something that if they let me come through, it means that that's what is going to happen. And they didn't want that to happen. So it was tough. It wasn't a physical battle. It was a serious spiritual battle. After uni, I wasn't getting job for 2 years. In the church, people ask God, why are you doing this? He came to follow you, and look at what he's going through. But for me, I did not come to Christ because I want him to give me a job. So in fact, of all that I was going through, that people see me and kind of like, this is tough, I was kind of enjoying it deep in me because my ultimate aim is to die and die in him and go to heaven. And that was all that I wanted. And I was sure that that is certain. So that was it for me. Sorry. One day, a friend of mine went home and he saw my uncle. And my uncle asked him, has your friend got a job? And my friend said, no, he's still trying. And my uncle said to my friend that he says he's going to be a Christian. That's why he's suffering. And that was tough to hear. But that's what God can do. I stick with him, knowing that he is a faithful God. Gradually, I don't know how he did it. I got a job, but I did not owe anyone money. He, in his own, I don't know how he did it, managed to give me money to buy food and live until I got something doing. So I just want to encourage you this morning that look, the Bible said that this is the time. If you hear his word, do not yield. Don't think about what is going to happen to you because he's got it planned for you. I just have to end it. But there was a song that God put on my heart when I was going through this that I just want to sing. Just 1 minute. So you said, I know that I still have Jesus. And that kept coming in spite of all that I was going through. I've compressed this. So if you want to have a chat with me or want to know more, grab me sometime. We can talk more if it will be a blessing to you. And the song goes like that. I know that I still have Jesus. If I lose all that I possess, I still know that I have Jesus. I'll sing a minute for you. I know that I still have Jesus. I know that I still have God. If I lose all that I may possess, I know that I still have Jesus. If I lose my dad, if I lose my mom, if I lose the love they once gave me, if I lose all that I may possess, I know that I still have Jesus. Oh, I know that I still have Jesus. I know that I still have God. If I lose all that I may possess, I know that I still have Jesus. Amen.
Keep clapping for Sam. That's a hard act to follow, Sam.
Yeah, cheers, Omal. You smashed it. And don't worry, I'm not planning on singing. Man, I've heard that before, but that's incredible. Sorry, I'm not checking my emails. I wasn't going to write any notes, but Laura made me. Yeah. So, my story is very different to Omal's, obviously. I was privileged enough to grow up in church. My mum was a Christian, my dad wasn't. Mum was part of this church many moons ago, and I was born into it, and I loved it. And you kind of just believe everything that you're told by your mum, don't you? Jesus, that the wooden spoon was the scariest form of punishment that you'll ever receive. I never saw it. These are all things I never saw, but I believed were true. And so I believed it. And I loved my church life. I loved my church family. My best friend was here. And it was great. It was all good. School was good. I had a really nice childhood. It was all nice. But there was one year, we used to go to a Bible conference thing called Stoneleigh. A lot of you will remember that. And I don't know if I was in Awesome 8s or Turbo 10s, something like that. It was good. And I vaguely remember it was a massive room. It probably wasn't actually much bigger than this, but it felt like massive. And it was full of kids. And we were singing, I don't know what the song was. And all of a sudden, my eyes were shut and the room was empty. And I kind of looked around and there was just this crazy bright light at the end. And you couldn't see what it was, but you could. It was clearly Jesus sitting on a throne. And I will never, ever forget that moment that I just ran. And I was like, man. And I sat on his knee. And it was amazing. And in that moment, I believed in Jesus. In that moment, I gave my life to him. And so even though I don't know, there wasn't a big story or anything. It was just, you grew up in Sunday school and you learn all this stuff. But in that moment, I definitely knew that Jesus was real. And he revealed himself to me. And it was an amazing moment. But it's definitely, your life is a journey, isn't it? So it's that was the moment that I met Jesus. But I chose not always to live the way that Jesus probably wanted me to. Growing up, I was all right at school, but I got to a point where then I got bored of school and I started doing other things. I would choose drink, I would choose drugs, and just sort of prat about, really, and be a bit of a monkey. And I moved away from home. I went to Guildford to study music, and it was very easy to choose other things, and I definitely did that. I got in lots of very scary situations, I genuinely don't know how I didn't end up in prison, and I genuinely don't know how I'm still alive, to put it bluntly. And so while I wasn't living for Jesus, there was no doubt in my mind that he wasn't real. I always knew he was real, and I knew that he loved me. But I chose to just bury it, I think. After a few years of kind of living that life, I came back to Lowestoft. I was out of money, so I had to go back to the bank of mum and dad. And I also wasn't welcome in the town anymore. I was kind of being chased by some people. So I came back here and kind of tried to carry on living the life, but it's a lot harder to get the drugs in Lowestoft than it was in Guildford. So it wasn't kind of in the same way. And then I met Laura, who's now my wife. And she wasn't a Christian. She didn't know Jesus. But then she found Jesus. I think it was Manda in your front room. She became a Christian, which was amazing. And even though I really hated it, I didn't want to come back to church because I didn't want to kind of face people. I think because I knew the reality was that Jesus is good and his church is good, and I need that in my life. But I was kind of desperate to hold on to this, do all this naughty stuff for some reason. I have no idea why. It felt like it was fun. So Laura was a massive part when she became a Christian, and she was like, no, I'm going to church and you're coming with me. So I had to come back, and it was all right. It worked out all right. So it was kind of, I reluctantly came back to church, and I realized that after a little while, I realized that there's no other option, really. While I thought all that stuff was fun, it really wasn't. It never filled the void that I had. And Jesus does. He simply does. And so obviously, if you would have asked me this a year ago or whenever, different stages of our lives, I hate the seasons thing, but it's true, isn't it? We all have seasons in our life. But right now, the last few years have been a crazy few years, and what's Jesus done for me, I've never been bothered particularly about how I look, what I'm wearing, how I come across to people. I've upset a lot of people. It doesn't really is what it is. Sorry. And I've always thought, I'm not going to change who I am. I'm going to be me, and that'll upset some people, and that's fine. But for some reason, I've always been like, man, Omar, I've always been so scared to tell people that I love Jesus. Even throughout all school, throughout everything. Unless I was really drunk, then I could. I remember I was in Ibiza, and I had a conversation with a Catholic. We were both really drunk, and we were discussing Jesus. It was quite interesting. But yeah, I've always just been really scared. And this last sort of few years, really, Jesus has just shown me how amazingly kind he is. And through loads of different things. I lost my job in COVID, and it was like, oh man, that's scary. I've never had a lot of money, and me and Laura have always struggled financially. So the panic sets in, doesn't it? You sort of like, man, what are we going to do? And so I was praying, Lord, I need a job that pays more money because I want to carry on. I've taken on the food bank job, but I needed some more hours to top up my wage. And he didn't give me a job. He said, I'll give you a house that's better than the one you're in, and you'll pay a lot less rent, and you will be able to afford it. And when we first got married 15 years ago, our joint wage was higher then than what it is now. It's literally, my wage has gone down and down every year. But we genuinely don't worry about money anymore. It doesn't, like, the maths doesn't make any sense. But God is so kind and so generous. And he's really been talking to me about how faith and fear cannot grow in the same heart. But they don't work. They don't work together. If one is going to go bigger, then the other one can't. And so for me, it's kind of, I'm at a stage now where God just keeps saying that. It's faith or fear. It's that moment it's nothing like that moment that Omal had where he had to choose what he was going to tell his dad. But every day, I still think I miss about at least 10 opportunities to pray for someone a day, I reckon. But then in them little moments when it's like someone tells you they've got a bad leg, and it's just choosing faith or choosing fear. And yeah, he just keeps revealing me more and more and more. Choose faith because God's good and he does things and he heals people. And however silly you think you look or you feel, he's bigger than all of that and he's better than all of that. And yeah, life's so much better when you're full of faith and fear. And that is what Jesus has done for me. There you go.